Hey everybody, Rad Mom here. Just a little quick impromptu thing I'm doing. This will probably be the first take, but just in case I'm talking to you, subscribe to the channel for more material approach to radical feminism, and like this video if you enjoy, this kind of analysis. I just had to do this. This made me so angry. Let's go see, okay? I'll tell you all about it when we get there. Okay, here we have Erin, what's her name? Vigeland, interviewing Kyla Schuller, who has written a book about white feminism, which is always a term that catches my attention because I am a white feminist. But I guess it's like having a boy who's your friend who isn't your boyfriend. Because, well, they define white feminism here in a minute. And a lot of, I think, what they talk about is what we would call liberal feminism. But they also contrast it with intersectional feminism, which definitely goes against my experience, because in my experience, the racist bitches are usually the ones who are the most worried about the poor, beleaguered minorities, right? Let's go.
We are back, and we are joined by Kyla Schuller, author of The Trouble with White Women, A Counter History of Feminism. You are also an assistant professor of women and gender studies at Rutgers University. Kyla, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, I mean, we have talked about the, it's the favorite topic of mine, talking about the perils and pitfalls of white feminism and what it represents. And we've talked about it on the show before. But your book described it in such a succinct way. And I loved this definition. White feminism is theft disguised as liberation. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Okay, and I just want to point out that if this were any other ethnic group being singled out like this, like white isn't even an ethnicity, but if this were any other group, I'm sorry, like this just rubs me so hard the wrong way, and I guess it's probably because I'm a white lady, but like nobody goes around talking about black feminism, even though that is literally what half of her book is apparently about, because she spends chapter after chapter comparing and contrasting, this white feminist who you've heard of with this black feminist who you haven't heard of. But they're intersectional, even though they are also working for their own issues, which, God bless, or whatever. Like, go for it. See after your needs. And some of those old white ladies apparently were super racist, and racism is always wrong. But this approach is just so aggravating.
And we can start there.
Yeah. I really wanted to understand the details and contours of what white feminism is and does when I wrote this book. And, I think it's so useful the way that people are using this term widely to understand the kind of feminism that is putting gender above all, and then ends up, as a result, actually leaning into other forms of inequality.
Okay, now if she were talking about gender roles, I'd be agreeing with her right now. But I'm pretty sure she's using that term more to mean sex. So, yes, feminism should put females above all. What the fuck are you talking about?
Like structural racism and capitalism and climate change because of putting...
You just lean in there, right? Did you do that on purpose?
Exactly. And because of putting gender above all. But I found that one of the most common ways that we talk about white feminism doesn't actually fully grasp the full extent of the problem. And that is that one of the most common definitions is white feminism is the kind of feminism that ignores women of color, poor women, and other marginalized folks.
Or hyper focuses on patronizing them, right?
And I found that idea that white feminism ignores more marginalized people actually is too benign. It underestimates the threat, the extent of the problem, which is that the trouble with white feminism is not that it is committing a sin of omission. It's actually an act of dispossession. It actually ends up reinforcing other forms of inequality in the struggle to get women to the top.
To the top? What the fuck is that? Okay? No, we're trying to liberate female people from oppression under patriarchy. That's it. No, no, women to the top? Why? What the fuck are you talking about?
Sheryl Sandberg being a perfect example of working so hard, as she argues, to get women to be corporate CEOs in contemporary capitalism. The problem is that if the goal is getting women to the top of our current structures, you actually end up reinforcing some of the other inequalities that have created that hierarchy in the.
Yes. And that's why liberal feminism is full of shit, because they want to tweak this and that, whereas, radical feminists would rather just take up the whole playing field and start over, because it was built by men for men and we don't even really fit here.
The first place.
So it kind of creates, it redefines white feminism as an action, as active, as opposed to kind of the more passive exclusion in the way that it had been previously discussed.
Yeah. Those white women, they're not just dumb and short-sighted. They're actively bad. Which, again, she does describe a couple specific examples of that, but they're from 100 years ago.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it. And then it also means that the solution to it needs to be more active also, right? The solution to white feminism is not only including people of color, the poor, trans people. It needs to be more active than that. The solution is actually to dismantling the idea that we can have a feminism that is ever separate from the fights against racism, wealth inequality, and many of the other structural.
Well, yeah, because women suffer most from those things, don't we? And women are everywhere. Okay, I think this was part of the problem why intersectionalism, as it is known today, was such an easy sell to so many feminists, because a lot of us, all of us, have more than one concern. Okay, it's difficult to put female above everything else because we are the interconnected ones, right? We are the relational ones, right? So that just is, it's harder for us to hold that in our head. And we are also our race. We are also our relation to our relatives. We are also our nationality. We are also lots of other things. Okay. And quite frankly, when you're female and you've always been female, it's kind of like, do fish know they're wet? You kind of tend to forget about it until somebody comes along and reminds you that it means something.
Inequities we have today.
So would you say that white feminism has defanged and depoliticized the feminist movement to a degree? I mean, I know that's not a direct process, and often that's, that's just sometimes what happens. Like, I feel like we saw over time, like I feel like we saw an example of that with MLK on Monday, right? I mean,
I don't mean to insult Martin Luther King, but I don't know that he was necessarily a feminist. And, this is where liberal feminism would come in, right? Liberal feminism is the one that has decided, oh yeah, it's intersectional, it's for everybody. Feminism is for everybody. I made it about identity. I don't know what this white feminism shit is. I'm starting to think it's a straw man.
Every brand is tweeting out quotes of,
so they can just be like, oh, no, we are the intersectional feminists. The bad liberal feminists are over there. They're the racist ones. Like, okay, but you're the one she is about to go on to directly compare, once again, the struggle of Black people in America to women in the world ever.
From MLK, and every Republican politician has no problem with his name. And I feel that there's a very similar thing that has happened with feminism that you describe.
I think the problem might be a little worse than that, though, which is that it's less that it has depoliticized a feminism that fights for real equality, and more that there have always been two distinct different kinds of feminism that actually have competing politics. And one of those is white feminism that is quite cozy with, empire, etc. And the other is intersectional feminism, which fights for a broad-based structural equality for all.
How exactly can feminism be directly linked with imperialism? I feel like that's feminism in name only, right? You know, like the Nazis called themselves socialists or whatever. Like, you can call yourself whatever you want. You can use whatever pretty titles for yourself that you want. But it doesn't change the fact that in the case of the Nazis, they were fascist. And in the case of, you know, these white feminists associated with imperialism, that, like, hello, imperialism is sexist as shit.
So, for example, one of the most shocking details I found when I was researching this book was that, according to a recent poll, 42% of women who vote Republican in the most recent elections consider themselves feminists. So it's actually that there is a strong, active, conservative, even sometimes explicit white supremacist feminism.
Okay. 10 years ago, I might have believed that Republican automatically equaled conservative or racist or both. There was a strong case to be made there. That was before the Democrats went completely off the rails with the whole wokeist bullshit. Okay, there are plenty of women out there who are not conservatives, who, for whatever reason, decided to vote Republican because they can't stomach what the supposed left has done to women's rights. They betrayed us, okay? And just because you didn't vote for them does not make you a conservative. Good grief. Or a racist.
Alongside this other form of feminism that supports things like Black Lives Matter and police reform or abolition.
Right, because radical feminism doesn't do any of those things. What the fuck?
And recognizing that there is different kinds of feminism, I think, actually is one of our central struggles.
No shit, Sherlock. Welcome to the party. But, like, most of the radical feminists I know are actively anti-racist and anti-imperialist. Okay? Many of the radical feminists I know are black. Weird. Apparently this woman, for example, does not know who Karen Davis is.
So what does white supremacist feminism look like? I mean, often you in your mind you see tiki torches and men.
Yes, because white supremacist feminism is an oxymoron.
Right? In Charlottesville, if you're thinking of that in like the past 6 years.
Right, yeah, but like, and I've talked a little bit about this, the women in those groups are discovering that the men in those groups have no interest in actually working with them. They're all misogynist as hell.
But that, what you're saying makes total sense. It's not incompatible. It's just maybe that it's not represented in the way that we think about white supremacy in our cultural ethos.
Yeah, in a less obvious way, it looks like Ivanka Trump in 2016 on the campaign trail saying, "My dad is a feminist." In a more explicit way, it looks like the work that sociologist Jesse Daniels has found in researching online platforms like Stormfront and other white supremacist sites, that there are actually active groups of women on these feminist subthreads on these sites. People who support pay equality, people who support some kind of gender balance at home in terms of sharing workload.
Good luck with that, hun. With your strong Viking man. Good luck with that.
And even people who support abortion in these white supremacist sites, but often with a caveat that they support abortion for people of color.
Right. See, all of these things are going to be predicated on that. They support equal pay for white women. They support equal share of home burden for white women. Okay? If at the end of the day, all of your politics come back to that, you're not a feminist because, man, you want to talk about leaving out women. Most women in the world are not white. None of them are men, but most of them are not white.
Because they want to prevent more births by people of color, but they don't support abortion for white women because they want to protect a white majority.
Well,
which would be why that is what conservatism is at this point.
that's interesting because that goes into one of the historical examples that you do cite in your later chapters, Margaret Sanger, I believe, right? And we can get into that for sure. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the modern examples and then go into that, because you mentioned empire there, and you write about how white feminism works alongside or works with racism, capitalism, and empire. And the empire thing struck me because another contemporary example, George W. Bush came out after Biden withdrew from Afghanistan and was saying, well, what about the women? What about the women in Afghanistan? And that is another, I think, great manifestation of this dynamic, or not great, but a great example of this dynamic that you're describing.
Absolutely. And especially when it comes to women in the Middle East, that has been a major thread, actually, for 130, 40 years. That it is the goal of white women to help save women from supposedly less civilized societies. The theorist Gayatri Spivak put it really well in the 1980s. She said it's the rhetoric of white women trying to save brown women from brown men.
Hey, fuck you. You know that? You know that? You know how many things I read when Afghanistan fell to the Taliban a few months ago, written by women who lived there, and how terrified they were? Fuck you. Fuck you. I don't give a shit what color those women are. I don't give a shit. They're living under a fascist, totalitarian, what do you call it when the God rules the country? I can't even think of it right now because I can hardly think straight. I'm so angry. 140 years ago, gee, what else was happening then? That was when the British split up the Middle East. Okay? And I'm not going to say that this wasn't maybe a line that somebody came up with to get their women involved in supporting this. Okay? Because God knows the women were rabble-rousing real bad at that time, and they probably wanted something to tell them. But, that doesn't mean that what? We're just supposed to accept that the way they treat women in those countries is great because multiculturalism, because all cultures are valid? Fuck you. Fuck you. Those women don't deserve to be mutilated. They don't deserve to be covered in giant black bags. They don't deserve to be shut out of education and commerce and everything. Fuck you. Fuck you. And I am not racist for wanting to go in and, theoretically help them somehow and get them the fuck out of there. And it hasn't even been straight through for the last 140 years because, until the late 70s, women in Iran had all the same freedoms that we have. Okay. And then our government was responsible for destabilizing that. Okay. Our government gave the goddamn Taliban their weapons. Lest we forget, this woman is talking like she doesn't fucking know anything about any of this. No fucking historical knowledge really whatsoever, even though her book is half about history. Apparently, she's not really interested in what the fuck happened in the Middle East, though. She's going to talk about it and accuse us of, we who care enough to have our hearts just wrenched for these women, racist. Fuck you.
And it ends up actually just reinforcing the idea that the U.S. is a beacon of progress and white civilization.
Okay, and again, this goes back to my thing of sometimes, a lot of the time, going back quite a ways, wealthy white women were literally the only ones with the extra time and resources to act on any of these ideas on their own. But, God forbid any of them do that. Because then they're just, privileged white women and they don't know what they're talking about. And apparently Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a racist bitch and that sucks. But that doesn't mean that every white woman who ever lifted a finger to do anything for anyone is.
And that you can use feminism as not just a cover for imperialism, but an explicit rationale.
We have to go in there to help the poor women. And if that isn't patronizing, I don't know what is. But that's not what the fuck I'm saying. That's not what the fuck I've heard anybody saying. Oh, well, you're not overtly saying it. It's dog whistles and shit. I can already hear the argument. But no. those women are tormented on a daily basis, and they'll tell you about it. These days, they can tell you about it in English.
For imperialism.
Yes, it's totally.
And like, if feminism, we actually do need to look at that, because if feminism is ever being used as any kind of a motivation for that, well, obviously we need to stamp that out.
Twisted, but I mean that is a view that a lot of people hold. Like during the Afghanistan war, I believe there were protests about save women from the Taliban by women in this country.
And what the fuck is wrong with that?
And it's it is very narrow, and I guess I do want to now dive in.
Okay. So like, white feminism on the one hand, white women on the one hand get shit for not caring about brown people, and then on the other hand they get shit for caring about brown people. Are you fucking kidding me?
To the chapters of your book, where you do this great thing where you pair a white feminist from a time or a topic with a black or indigenous or trans feminist of a similar period, and you highlight these.
Ain't no trans feminists.
Contrast. So I guess we can start with this first example, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frances E.W. Harper. Can you talk?
I feel like in a couple minutes she's calling her Katie Stanton, so she goes from Elizabeth Cady Stanton to Katie Stanton. It's like, girl, did you not see Mean Girls? Come on.
Talk about their stories and how they contrast and converge.
Yeah, I was really interested in this book in not just telling a critique of white feminism, but showing that white feminism has actually been sidestepping a vibrant form of feminism for true equality.
Right, black women working for their interests. And white women should not work against black women working for their interests. We should help them. Yes. But like, it's not necessarily better just by virtue of the fact that they're black women working for black women.
All along. And so the first chapter contrasting Stanton is particularly dramatic, I think, because Stanton is often considered, with her and Susan B. Anthony, her compatriot in the movement.
No. Sorry about that. We heard a little emergency. Kids are all home from school because of the snow that didn't happen.
Stepping a vibrant form of feminism for true equality all along. And so the first chapter contrasting Stanton is particularly dramatic, I think, because Stanton is often considered, with her and Susan B. Anthony, her compatriot in the movement, as the founders of feminism, and as the most primary significant feminist activists of their time. But Stanton and Anthony both, in the wake of Reconstruction, actually reinforced racism as a way to further their own aims.
Which I've read about this, and it's pretty gross, admittedly, but this is the 19th century.
And that's because after Reconstruction, black men were awarded the right to vote, but not white women. And Stanton in particular gives many, many racist stump speeches where she used all kinds of derogatory language and said things like, you are letting the most ignorant, debased, degraded elements of society vote, but you are not letting your pure, white, potentially Mayflower descendant wives who are vote, and therefore you're denying a moral force in society.
Arguably not giving women the vote is denying a moral force in society, because we see how things go when men run things. But, yeah, I don't know. Maybe she should have taken this as a clue that it's going to be bros before hoes. Honey, if you're white men, we're worried about you. They would have put you first, right? Like, what the fuck? Maybe you should check your loyalties.
She's the name we have. She's the statue we have in Central Park. And yet there was always another kind of feminism that I think is especially exemplified by...
Oh, yeah. And also, are we going to start, erasing men from history now because they were racist? I hope not, because that would take a long time, and then we wouldn't have any more history.
The poet Frances E.W. Harper, who was a person many people probably haven't heard of, even though she was a writer who sold 50,000 books in the 1860s, which is an astonishing number for that era. And she raised so much money from her books and her lecture tours that she actually was a major funding source for the Underground Railroad.
And obviously this is someone feminism should be celebrating, yes.
Gave hundreds and hundreds of lectures a year on women's rights, and women's rights as a partner of a post-Reconstruction movement for Blacks to gain land, literacy, and liberation was her framework. Hers was a framework for Black self-sufficiency and resilience and sustainability that
can't have that.
Meant actually getting control of some of the means of production. It was quite different from a message of the purity and morality of white women that Stanton offered. And yet Harper has been largely...
I feel like Harper's message really had nothing to do with white women, which is fine. She was seeing after her own interests.
Erased from feminist history outside of some academic circles.
And is that...
Most of feminist history has been erased entirely outside of some academic circles. Oh my God.
Because of the intersectional feminists, or I mean, I guess I'm asking you to editorialize a bit, but how would you, one, we herald our white members of history to a degree that's very odd and also racist, but also would you say that that's a largely deliberate suppression of that kind of feminism because of the multi-pronged nature of that feminism and how many things it challenges?
Like what? Economics? Feminism needs to challenge economics. Hello, we're affected by economics too.
Including capital?
I think so, right? We're so accustomed to the idea that feminism means the belief in gender equality.
No. Feminism is about the liberation of female people from oppression under patriarchy. That's what feminism is. You wrote a whole fucking book about it and you don't even know what you're talking about. Congratulations.
That when feminism comes along with all these other campaigns also, it looks like, well, that's a Black woman's issue.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's that feminism is part of everything else. Not that everything else is part of feminism. Feminism isn't for everyone, but it should be everywhere.
Instead of, oh no, this is a feminism that's actually recognizing if we are going to redress the effects of slavery in the U.S., that means actually changing our structure of social relations, of our economy, of the idea that you can sacrifice entire populations.
Okay, were those privileged white women short-sighted and they just wanted to say? Sure, probably. What in the fuck does that have to do with anything that's going on now, though?
For the bottom line. It looks a lot more complicated than feminism. And what's fascinating is that suppression, as when you look at the historical record, you can actually look exactly when and where it happened. We don't have to make conjectures about, it probably got sidestepped. We can actually see, yes, it got excluded. And that's because the first time that anyone thought there could be such a thing as a history of feminism or the women's movement was when none other than Katie Stanton and Susan B. Anthony themselves sat down in the 1880s to write the history of the women's movement.
Okay. So, the history of feminism focuses on the rich white ladies because the rich white ladies fucking wrote it. That problem solved? Like, that would be the answer to your question, right?
And they produced a 4-volume work that has become the set of records for historians up till now about what feminism looked like. And they deliberately left Harper out of the volume.
Even though she had already sold, 50,000 book copies of her own book, right? I feel like these two women were not the only ones responsible for the fact that that book didn't make it, through the generations to be widely known now. Right? That cannot just have been those two women. Because racism is what you call it. Institutional. Yeah.
they had had so many battles with her on platform stages of conventions around the country that they left her out, and instead they really elevated Sojourner Truth, and they turned Sojourner Truth into a figure who only supported women and left out her critiques of racism. And actually,
which is so stupid. Again, I'm speaking as a white lady, but I don't see the hard line there. I don't necessarily think that those two things are mutually exclusive, especially since they coexist in millions of people. I don't really know a whole lot about that myself, but if some other woman wants to talk about her experiences with that, great. Go for it. What?
Even used versions of Sojourner Truth's speeches that were written by white women and made her sound like a plantation mammy, when in fact she was a speaker of standard English and was not from the South. And the original transcriptions of her speeches look nothing like the anti-woman version.
Wow. That's some dirty shit. I'm still not understanding what it has directly to do with anything that's going on right now, though.
Sojourner Truth we've inherited today from Stanton and Anthony.
That is, I mean, unbelievable. I mean, it is believable, but it's unreal. Like, and two, how deliberate. You wrote about how deliberate Stanton's pivot really was to racism is interesting as well. Can you flesh that out?
Yeah, what's interesting about her pivot is that there were preludes there all along. She had long supported the idea that women needed the vote because they were the most moral, upright figures of society. And when they fully joined the democratic process, the idea was that they would help redeem the nation as a whole. From her very first speech to the New York State Legislature, she established her own authority as...
I don't know. There might be an argument there, considering 50, 60 years later, we had the welfare state, we had Medicaid, we had food stamps rolling out in the 40s. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how exactly those dots connect, but I feel like there's an argument to be made there.
As a Mayflower descendant and a descendant of a Revolutionary War hero.
Who gives a shit?
So she really leaned into the fact that she was... which she called, blue-blooded, and was...
Right, she's not just white, she's waspy.
Belonged to the richest family in town. And
that sounds a little white supremacy-y in and of itself.
Exactly. I mean, she was also an abolitionist, right? But this is a kind of abolition that supports the end of slavery, but isn't willing to go all the way to eradicating racism as a structure. But after 1865, then it became much more a battle. Susan B. Anthony said things like, "I will cut off my right hand before I give the vote to Black men before women." And she had long been a partner and collaborator with Frederick Douglass.
Okay. Again, she did Frederick Douglass dirty, and we'll hear about that in a minute. But, I don't know. Maybe that's the connection, because I have definitely heard some modern women say things like that. I don't know about Black men specifically, but, that they would rather just blow the whole thing up than work for men and for the betterment of men before women. Again, I really don't understand the singling out of the Black people. I don't. Why?
But when she started giving speeches, major convention speeches, railing against immigrants from China, immigrants from Ireland, against...
Like immigrants from Ireland were white. Kind of. I'm actually not even Irish myself, but I look a lot like them, and I have never, ever, ever been accused of being anything other than a white lady.
Sambo was a term she used regularly. And actually joined partnership with a very notorious white supremacist newspaper magnate. Then she lost many of her allies, and people like Frederick Douglass and Francis Harper actually broke away from Stanton to Anthony and formed a whole new organization that fought for women's rights alongside Black rights, because Stanton and Anthony's organization really became about white rights above all. One of her
which doesn't make any sense. You know, one kind of oppression is just a different flavor of it from a different kind of oppression. Okay, so like, oh, well, we'll let white women vote, but like what, not Black women? Why? What? I don't get it. I don't get it. I straight up, I'm not even sure what to say against this because I don't understand it.
One of Anthony's, or one of their proteges, actually would even say in her stump speeches, white supremacy will be strengthened by women's suffrage.
And so,
if only white women get the vote, then yeah, I guess.
It's a deliberate political pivot, and the sadness of it is that did lead to some success, and like that's would it be fair to say that that is the birth of white feminism today?
Yes, absolutely. And what's so harmful about it is that so often...
So you're literally trying to trace back these two groups that you have imagined in your head to distance yourself from the bullshitters in your camp. Goes all the way back to the mid-19th century? Are you serious? The only institutions we have like that in this country are things like colleges and like, you know, federal stuff. Like what club? Like that doesn't make any sense. I'm not, no.
Then it's deemed the birth of feminism, right? Instead of the birth of white feminism alongside this other feminism led by...
And anyway, everybody knows that feminism was born in the 18th century. Mary Wollstonecraft, hello.
People like Harper and to some degree Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and others, which we could now call the birth of intersectional feminism, even though that term intersectional feminism wasn't actually coined until the 1980s by the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw.
So I guess let's move a little bit forward. I want to go through a lot of these examples, but let's talk about Harriet Beecher Stowe versus Harriet Jacobs in this time period. Tell us a little bit about the way in which I guess I don't know how to describe it, but there was a contrast in the way that white versus Black feminists were owning their own power to a degree. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Harriet Beecher Stowe, of course, wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was the second best-selling novel of the entire 19th century in the United States. And it's a novel that really positions white women as the saviors of enslaved people, that they will be the teachers, trainers, really discipliners of their servants and of the enslaved, and that's part of her.
Oh wow! So a group of people had this book and this notion that positioned them as the best people and the saviors of humanity. No other group's ever been guilty of that.
Vision of abolition, versus Harriet Jacobs, who is another really compelling figure. You know, extraordinary figure actually, and someone who it's amazing we don't have 5 movies about Harriet Jacobs' life. Because among many things that she did was when she self-emancipated from slavery to run away from her enslaver, she actually hid in a tiny attic space, so small she couldn't even stand up, and she hid there for 7 years until she had the opportunity to take a boat north and escape North Carolina.
Wow.
She wanted to tell her story to support the abolition movement in the 1850s and had a colleague approach Harriet Beecher Stowe to say, hey, could you write this person's story? Harriet Jacobs escaped in part because of the sexual abuse she was suffering at the hands of her enslaver. And they thought, well, Harriet Beecher Stowe might be the right person to bring that view of the sexual abuse element of slavery into the national eye. Instead, Harriet Beecher Stowe said, thank you for telling me these details of this amazing story of her hiding in an attic for 7 years. I'm going to use these details in my next book. Goodbye. And then never replied to any of the increasingly desperate letters afterwards saying, no, we're not asking you to steal this woman's story. And Harriet Jacobs was so incensed that she actually wrote her own story. Like, she was lucky enough that she was literate from youth. And it is now, deemed the most important woman's slave autobiography. It was she's the first Black woman to publish her own story, and she actually literally published it herself because she couldn't find a publisher to support it. And it's a brilliant example of the kind of self-determination that guided intersectional feminism.
Okay. Again, I'm not really sure how a Black woman telling her story is more intersectional than a white woman telling her story. Because, like, okay, she has, like, the female and the Black, right? But, like, a white woman might, for example, have woman and poor. I just don't. The idea that a white woman automatically is just a monolith. At least one of these women should know better.
And meanwhile, Harriet Beecher Stowe becomes the sort of patron saint of abolition. And then after Reconstruction, she and her husband bought the largest orange plantation in Florida so that she herself could experiment with disciplining and civilizing the formerly enslaved.
That's disgusting. And these people had some really twisted ideas and did some really horrible things. But, like, Henry Ford, anybody? Like, every king of England ever? Anybody? Like, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. I mean, really? We're just gonna sit and harp on the fact that these people made some pretty egregious mistakes. I don't know. Maybe I'm cynical, but, these white women have been portrayed as perfect angels of the movement for so long, and now the Black women are being presented the same way. And I am not going to sit here and assume that those Black women were perfect. Did they do that? No. I'm not going to sit here and trying to write their character. I'm just saying we're all human, and we know this. Like, I mean, can we get Roman Polanski's Oscar back?
And they're really dramatic examples of that sort of self-led versus white maternalist version of feminism that tried to enact a literal theft.
Like, okay. There's nothing feminist about trying to educate and civilize the Black people. That's not a feminist thing. That's not related to that. That has nothing to do with it. I feel like you don't need to have been a feminist to do something stupid and crazy like that. And I feel like maybe if you actually were working for the liberation of all women, then that wouldn't have even been a thought in your head. Again, people can call themselves whatever pretty words that they want, and it doesn't change the fact of what they do. Watch what they do, not what they say, right?
And that brings us back to what we were talking about with Afghanistan, where there is this and it's just a thread through colonialism as well. We are going to civilize this population, and it's all inherently very narcissistic, of course. And I don't want to. We had someone write in to ask you a question, and so I don't want to.
Okay, but like, let's say, for example, bringing menstrual products to India. Just off the top of my head as an example. That might be considered bringing them some civilization, wouldn't it? Is that imperialist, though? To try and, let's say, raise money to provide sanitary products for women in India who are still living in, some of them in menstrual huts and being taken out of school? Would that be racist of me?
move past that, even though we're going a little bit backwards about Stanton. Margot from Mass writes in, I had read that Stanton and the early conferences were originally urged to work for suffrage by Frederick Douglass, and they didn't agree on it as a goal until Douglass encouraged them to fight for it as a means to get other rights. Is that true?
It is absolutely true. I mean, it's really one conference. The conference is often considered the start of women's rights in the U.S., and this is the famous 1848 Seneca Falls Convention. And Stanton had said, we want to support the fight for women to vote. And nobody would support it until Douglass stood up. And Douglass was the only Black person in the entire many hundred person convention. And he said, I will not fight for my rights without fighting for the rights of women. And then,
which is a really great thing to say. And that's how it should be, because if any of us are oppressed, then we all are or could be. Right? And it didn't go well for him.
Then the vote passed. But it wouldn't have passed in 1848 without Douglass, which made her later betrayal of him and of the rights of African Americans especially poignant.
Yeah, these evil white ladies. Ugh.
I mean, it's especially disgusting. I mean,
yeah.
True. That is so right. Thank you for that question, Margot. I want to move a little bit forward because I mentioned the Margaret Sanger example earlier when we were talking about reproductive rights and how, or when you were mentioning how these white supremacist sites are in favor of abortion but only for non-white people to make the population more pure.
Because they're racist, not feminist.
More white, etc. Talk a little bit about the contrast between Margaret Sanger and Dr. Dorothy Farabee, if I'm pronouncing it.
Yeah, it's a contrast that has a lot of consequence for us today. And that contrast can be summed up in present day terms as a difference between fighting just for reproductive choice, which is represented by Sanger, or reproductive justice, which is represented by Farabee. So what those terms mean is that reproductive choice is a movement that puts one goal above all, and that goal is enabling women to prevent pregnancy. For now, that means through contraception or abortion. And Sanger's
okay, I hate to quibble right here, but if you have to get an abortion, then you haven't prevented a pregnancy.
That meant through contraception. This was her.
I think maybe you mean prevent births would be a better way of saying that.
And it was an especially complicated goal for her because she didn't understand it only as a means of women's choice and women's self-determination. She understood it also as a eugenic goal, as a way to cleanse and improve the biological quality of the population. And that's because she firmly believed throughout her life that 25% of the world's people were not fit to reproduce.
Okay, that's a lot. And who the fuck is anyone to make that determination? Wow.
They were of inferior quality, genetically, and especially in terms of mental and physical disability. Her platform of eugenics wasn't actually especially racist. Ooh. It wasn't a goal of eliminating non-white people. It was a goal of eliminating disability, and disability was a massive category for her.
So she didn't think being Black was a disability. I'm confused.
For many others in her time period. It included things like alcoholism or poverty or many conditions we would no longer now consider to be about biological situation. But so she wanted birth control to prevent pregnancy.
And that's why nobody is qualified to make determinations like that. Oh my God. Because I don't care when in history you live, we don't know everything.
Pregnancy as a tool of improving the nation. And also of enabling some women to get to decide whether or not that they are pregnant. But again, it's a goal that puts sort of like restriction above all. And it's a goal that understands that it positions some women's pregnancies as undesirable, not just for themselves, but for the nation as a whole. And she was,
which is not something that we've really gotten away from, I don't think, in a lot of ways, which is horrible. Yeah, but I don't. This disc basically she's coming the long way around to try and in large way discredit us. Let's see.
Was involved and cooperated with a lot of the nation's leading eugenicists to make birth control more available. The other approach is represented by Dr. Dorothy Farabee, who is a Black physician and led really important health access projects in the Mississippi Delta for sharecroppers, especially. And her goal was 3 parts. It was, yes, helping women prevent pregnancy, but also helping poor women be able to achieve pregnancy in the first place, if in light of things like increasing eugenic and sterilization campaigns. And then third, of helping poor women raise children in healthy environments.
Ooh.
So it's a more broad-based goal of reproductive justice, as it's now called.
Right, because I actually saw something about this in a Samantha Bee interview, I think maybe a couple of years ago, with a lady in Louisiana who is working on reproductive justice. I really love this idea.
By Rena Ross, a term she coined in the 1990s, that acknowledges that especially for poor women and Black and Latinx women, the largest...
Latinx. Well, there it is, in case anyone was wondering how to pronounce that garbage. What nonsense. The Spanish language is gendered. I do not think those people appreciate what is essentially a white woman. I don't know. Schuller could be Jewish, I guess. But, like, isn't that literally the kind of thing that she's complaining about? White women coming along and telling people of color what to do?
Barriers to reproductive health and justice are not contraception. It's about access to healthy housing, healthcare, jobs that pay living wages. It's a much more broad-based goal that reflects that broader goal of intersectional feminism.
Right, but see, that would be feminism working for mothers, wouldn't it? And we all know that feminism really doesn't like to do that.
Together.
Yeah, I mean, and that is obviously like has stood the test of time. I mean, these people that you cite and that you contrast, I'll admit the white people are the ones I learned about in history and the ones that I...
Right, because they wrote it.
Have a better understanding of, and some of these counterexamples, that's why this is so helpful. It doesn't, we didn't learn about that. And
so why not just write a book celebrating Black feminists? Why is it necessary to take the white people down a peg to do so?
So, yeah. I want to just move a little bit to other examples just before we run out of time, because some of these are really great, including Janice Raymond and Sandy Stone on...
Here we go. We're going to jump forward 100 years. You ready?
And this is applicable to the current day in discussions of TERFs. And J.K. Rowling is the most obvious example, but
Woo!
This is very applicable for modern feminist discourse here. Tell us a little bit about those two feminists and what honestly it says is about modern day feminist discourse around trans women.
Yeah, it was really important to me to show how the logic of
technical difficulties are infuriating.
Feminists, who argue that trans women are not women.
Because they're men. If they weren't men, they wouldn't be trans anything, would they?
is actually part of white feminism.
No.
Even though it's less obvious, because we most often think of white feminism in terms of its racism. But there is a...
Right. Racist white women from the 19th century are not directly connected to people now understanding that men are not women. Okay? Because black women are women.
There's a subliminal racism in the position of TERFs. And so I look at especially the role of the trans musician and sound engineer and activist Sandy Stone, who was part of a really important collective, a lesbian recording artist collective
as a man
that sold hundreds of thousands of records in the 1970s and 80s.
That's really awesome, and it's really kind of disgusting that there was some dude right in the middle of all of that.
Olivia Records. And then Janice Raymond, who is an academic and author of probably the most important TERF book called The Transsexual Empire, who supported a campaign to run Sandy Stone, a trans woman, out of Olivia Records.
Because they're men.
In the 70s. And it was a successful campaign. And we often...
It didn't stick. That, to me, is the thing that leaps out at me that is connected to the modern day, is that didn't stick.
Talk about and recognize that anti-trans feminists are what we call biological essentialists, right?
Okay. I was thinking about this earlier. I'm really, really tired of this idea of being an essentialist, right? Okay, because sometimes there literally is just one thing that makes you a thing. Like I said in the last video, there's only one thing that makes you homosexual. And the way you dress is not it. And the way you talk is not it. And what music you like is not it. Right? None of those things. None of it. There's only one thing that makes me a redhead. It's having red hair. Right? If I had all of the other attributes, the pale skin, the freckles, the weird colored eyes, the whole bit, but I had brown hair, then I wouldn't be a fucking redhead. Okay? There are different expressions of femaleness. And there are, I suppose, she's about to bring up intersex people. Intersex people are also either male or female. And Excelsior has done an amazing job of explaining just how it is. That, like, you can have the same difference of sexual development in a male person versus a female person, and it will affect the two of them differently and be a different syndrome because they are either male or female. That doesn't make them magically a third sex or neither.
They say sex is real.
Yeah.
You're born a sex. It's very tidy and clear, and it can never change, right?
Well, I don't know about it always being tidy and clear, but it can never change. No, it can never change any more than I can change the color that my hair naturally grows in. I can dye it. I can keep dyeing it every 2 weeks for the rest of my life. But my genetic code will always write it red.
Biology is destiny. Is that kind of logic?
No. That does not follow. Let's go back and hear that again real quick.
It's very tidy and clear, and it can never change, right? Biology is destiny. Is that kind of logic?
Okay, because I am... you know how sexist that is? You just expounded a very sexist idea. That because I am female, my destiny is just to be female. Whatever the fuck that means, since apparently trans women are women. Like, no. It isn't my destiny, but it is my starting point. And after you have started the journey, you cannot retroactively change where you began. I'm going to die in here. Let's get this done, shall we?
Flies in the face of research that shows that anything up to 2% of births are intersex to some degree, right? But it's an insistence that biology...
Right, but we already established that that's not a third thing.
Biology is extremely tidy, and sex is always straightforward and set in stone.
Well, it is pretty much set in stone, considering that it is set at conception. Whatever, for whatever that's worth. And then shortly after that, you diverge down one path or another. And again, you cannot go back and retroactively change where you started after you've gotten, down the road a ways. You can't do that.
That is absolutely true that TERFs are biological essentialists, but TERFs are also experience essentialists. And what I mean by that is that they say a trans woman can't be a woman also because she didn't have the experience of being a woman growing up.
Okay. So wait a minute. We're not allowed to comment on the state of women in Afghanistan, but male people can come in and say they know all about being female. What the fuck is that shit?
She didn't have the universal experience of menstruation or the universal experience of sexual harassment or any of the other elements of being in a female body. The problem is that there is no such thing as that universal female experience.
Fuck you double. And I will see your dumb ass in hell. There is no universal female experience. It's called being female. What the fuck? Yeah, that's the universal female experience, dumbass.
Right, and this is one of the points that Audre Lorde has made over and over again in her lifetime, right? Like, Black women have 5 times the rate of breast cancer, of sexual assault and abuse, right? One of the things that Harriet Jacobs was illuminates versus Harriet Beecher Stowe is that, in the 1860s, what is the position of being a woman? If you're Harriet Jacobs, you might be hiding in an attic for 7 years. If you're an enslaved Black woman being abused by your enslaver, if you're a white woman, you might have a completely different set of experiences.
No shit, but you're going to be having all of those experiences while female, okay? While risking pregnancy. Well, not just by walking around, but you know what I mean. By living your life as a normal person, having intercourse with the opposite, having a sex life at all. Okay, men don't have that problem. Men never just accidentally turn up pregnant, do they? Ever.
But TERFs ignore all that and say, no, there is just one way to be a woman, and trans women aren't that version. So
No. There's as many ways to be a woman as there are women. But you have to be a woman. You have to be female. And I know that you know what that means. I know that you know what that means. Look at you. You are one. So infuriating. You're selling us out. You're selling us out. Okay, but someone like me who wants to actually speak up for women's material needs is a bigot. And you're sitting here trying to draw straight, direct lines from us to eugenicists. So fuck you.
They can't be women. But
because they're men. It's nothing to do with the version of it. They can perform whatever fucking version of womanhood they so desire. They're still men.
That is reinscribing that universal woman.
Oh, yeah, and actually I wanted to add that we're not trans exclusionary, we're male exclusionary, because trans guys, trans mask, all the poor little NB girls who are so very lost and confused. Everyone who's female is our purview. Whether they're trans, or Black, or whatever. How's that for intersectional for you?
And the other piece of it is that they also often position men as oppressors, right?
Yeah.
And that women need to be protected from men. It's a very simple...
It's called patriarchy. Are we really just... Oh, no, that's not a thing. Really?
...simplified view of power, where men oppress men. It's a very simplified view of power, where men oppress and women are oppressed.
Like, generally speaking, that's a pretty easily observable phenomenon. You want to talk about some books? There have been reams and piles and mountains of books written about the misogyny of your average guy and the system that they built. Okay? It isn't so much that men as individuals oppress women as individuals. It's that the system men built oppresses women as a group. But, we're confusing the micro and the macro again, and these people do that almost as often as they flip-flop back and forth between reproductive role and societal role.
And that's kind of the end of the story for understanding contemporary politics. And that, again, is something that is a lot like white feminism, because if we look back to the Combahee River Collective, famous intersectional feminist group in the 1970s, they made it really clear back in the mid-70s. Often for us as Black women, they said, Black men are more of our allies than white women because we're fighting more concerns than just sex.
Okay, so proximity a lot of times creates familiarity. You have the same goals. You know these people. Okay, fine. What in the fuck does this have to do with trans women?
And that's the kind of dynamic that TERFs can't see. They only see sex, and they put everything else secondary. And
that's called feminism.
That's what white feminism is.
Right. And
hey, at least she said sex this time.
And the point you make about biological essentialism, that is a step away from a white supremacist perspective, right? Where
because only female people can be women means that white people, that is a step away from saying white people are smarter than everybody? How?
We are these static things, and our environment or our skin color or the gender that we have been assigned at birth, that is...
Your sex affects your brain structure. It affects your neurochemistry. It certainly affects your life outcomes. Yes, it does. It's important. And these two women just selling us out. We're like, nah, none of that's important. Like, what kind of self-loathing is this?
Natural, and anything unnatural is evil in and of itself.
Wait, what?
At birth, that is natural, and our environment or our skin color or the gender that we have been assigned at birth, that is natural, and anything unnatural is evil in and of itself. And
like childlessness? What? Like most radical feminists, or a whole shit ton of them, are lesbians. Which I'm not saying that that's unnatural, but certainly your classical conservative white supremacist would say that a childless woman is unnatural, right?
That is very much in keeping with these themes that you've been discussing today.
I think that's...
Because you made it be so, because that's the way you framed it. Good for you.
Absolutely right. And my specialty as a scholar is in 19th century race science.
No shit, really? I think you might want to expand your scope just a smidge. It's giving you the tunnel vision.
And the beginnings of a belief in biological essentialism about sex. And it actually...
What the fuck are you... Okay, you're trying to tell me that nobody before the 19th century believed that a woman being a woman determined her life course? Really? That no one believed that being female made you a woman before the 19th century? Is that what you just said? Really? I can't believe that's so stupid.
In race science. And the beginnings of a belief in biological essentialism about sex. And it actually turns out that when people got really, really attached to the sex binary, it was as a result of race science.
What the fuck are you talking about? What the fuck? Oh my god. Going all the way back to the beginning of civilization. People were obsessed with the sex binary because people are kind of obsessed with sex, as a thing you do. Making love, the penetration, the reproductive act, whatever the fuck you want to call it, is only reproductive because there's male and female, and when they come together, they might, combine gametes and make a third person. Or hell, a fourth and a fifth person. You never know. Sometimes you get a surprise. But the point remains... No, what the fuck? Is this some newfangled version of that whole, oh, well, the happy little indigenous people just didn't know about the gender binary until the evil white man came and colonized them, oh, which is so fucking racist. You trying to tell me that native peoples had no fucking idea how babies were made until the 19th century? Are you fucking serious?
And that literally, it was race scientists who said white people have evolved the sex binary and nobody else has.
What the fuck are you talking about? Okay. Just for one point, our civilization was actually started by the Greeks. They invented democracy. You've probably heard of them. The ancient Greeks, yeah? How many famous ancient Greek women can you name? Like one, right? Helen. And they're not even sure if she was real. Right? What the fuck are you talking about? Like, our civilization goes back all the way. And the reason that you can't name any famous Greek women is because there fucking weren't any. Because they didn't educate them. Okay? Because the polis, the society, was for men. And the homestead was for women. Okay? If that is an obsession with the fucking gender binary, I don't know what is.
You're absolutely right to draw that connection.
And that was 5,000 fucking years ago. Oh.
And the other thing I want to point out is like the idea that a woman's experience, that there is a universal woman's experience, ignores, as you say, all the class and race components to it as well.
No, the universal woman's experience is being female under any of those conditions. Okay, under our hypothetical motherhood is enough for the machinations of the powers that be to combine to attempt to direct our life path, to keep us from education, to keep us from sanitary products, okay, to keep us from each other. And you two are facilitating this shit. It makes me so angry.
But ignores the often very traumatic experience of growing up trans in a society that is immensely hostile to that.
Not anymore. Right? The little trans babies now have it the best they've ever had it, right? And how come Jazz Jennings is so miserable?
Where that is a set of its own unique experiences and trauma, and then someone like J.K. Rowling has very publicly basically devalued that or said that that is separate and distinct, when obviously there's no way to make that delineation, except if you're trying to reach a conclusion that is bigoted.
All right. I'm going to make a distinction right now that I've been wanting to make for so long. There is making a judgment, and then there is being judgmental. Okay? Observing that someone is male is a judgment based on observation. Okay? Unless you think automatically badly of males, which some women do, but unless you do that, that's simply a neutral thing. Like observing the color of the sky. I don't, being able to create judgments based on your own observations about the world is not the same as making value judgments based on your own feelings and ethics. It's not the same thing. Saying that a man cannot be a woman is just a fact. There's nothing necessarily wrong with being a man.
Absolutely, right? TERFs are insistent that the largest victims of gender are women.
Yep. Because gender, these social roles that are foisted on us all as little children, is patriarchal. Again, that's pretty obvious if you look at it, and like, I'm going to try and come up with an example, but like, the way little boys are encouraged to express themselves loudly, and they're, you know, if they are bossy, then they're leaders, and if a little girl is bossy, well, she's just bossy. Like, that's the classic example, right? Or I was just hearing something the other day, I forget even where I heard this, I watched too many of these, where, like, as small children, people tend to let their little boys, you know, climb and explore unaided, as opposed to, you know, sort of hovering over the little girls and giving them more assistance. When they're little kids.
And the only victims, you know, but any kind of fight toward like who is the biggest victim is not usually going to turn out very well.
Oh yeah, are we going to stop talking about minorities then? Like, didn't you just make the case that black women were more the victims of the 19th century, or so, I don't know. Like, categories are only bad when we make them, right?
That's not a very strong place from which to build a movement, but that is one of the many turf errors, absolutely. Toward like who is the biggest victim is not usually going to turn out very well. That's not a very strong place from which to build a movement.
Okay, so as leftists, we're not supposed to go find the most underprivileged people and offer them the most resources first? Isn't that the whole thing that y'all love to do?
But that is one of the many turf errors, absolutely.
Right. All right. Well, then let's conclude talking about the final, I believe, contrast that you drew between someone like Sheryl Sandberg, author of Lean In, Facebook executive or former Facebook executive, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who everyone is, of course, familiar with here. And that is a contrast really between individual leaning in, right, which is you get yours in the corporate boardroom, right? You make sure you make all the money that you can, versus solidarity and working with others.
Yeah, by wearing an Eat the Rich dress to the fucking Met Gala. I don't know, I'm not a woman of color, but I'm definitely on the poorer side over here. And, like, I did not feel represented by that shit. I was instantly and viscerally offended by that shit. So I don't know who she's trying to build solidarity with, but it ain't this working class bitch. And as for Sheryl Sandberg, yeah, I mean, work real hard to be one of the guys is not a winning strategy.
And promoting, she openly talks about intersectionality. AOC does. So,
well, yes, because that's part of her brand. But, like, I just don't. These false dichotomies. This is a book full of false dichotomies. Yay.
Talk a little bit about that, and then we can really kind of bring it full circle to where we are at in 2022, which is hard.
Yeah, I love that AOC says things like, I'm not running from the left, I'm running from the bottom. And to me, that is a clear indication of her intersectional politics. And
really? Because that seems like a fucking catchphrase to me. Because running from the left is working for collectivist goals, and you don't get much more intersectional than trying to give more things to everybody.
Absolutely. She does talk about intersectionality explicitly. Of course, AOC is also of the left, right? But I think she makes that distinction because sometimes the left can be framed as a position that puts class above everything else, right?
Yes.
In the way that feminism is often framed as putting sex above everything else.
Yes! What? Shit.
And just putting sex above everything else. And she wanted to really signal that's not her position. She's coming from a place that finds race and class to be fully intertwined, and gender inequality to be another thread in that mixture. So, you know, and one of the examples of how her...
Okay, is it possible to, like, maybe do a round robin or some shit? Like, is it really necessary to try and address all of the problems at once?
Response to those things is to fight for structural change is that famous speech she gave after Representative Yoho called her a bitch as she was going up the stairs to the Capitol. And she decided, instead of just swallowing it or instead of responding on an individual level, she would give this impromptu speech in front of the House about the structural position of sexism, and especially people working in service jobs and the kind of constant sexual harassment and demeaning behavior that they're facing.
Yeah, I read that speech. I liked it. Why don't you bring up some legislation about that?
And of course, her linking up with the ever-expanding squad to fight for a coalitional politics.
At some point, doesn't it become a team and not a squad? I don't know.
And that is one of the main lessons of intersectional feminism. It's that the best critique of power is not from the top. It's not about getting yourself to the top. The best critique of power is from the vantage of the bottom. This is one of the things that Kabahi River Collective laid out. And
oh my God, like that's a class analysis. What the fuck?
OC really lives out. Because
I mean, really, bottom of what? The fucking economic class system, right?
From the bottom is where you can see all the different layers
that
make up our power structures in society.
And no, you can't. Speaking as somebody who's been there and done that, you can't see that much. I mean, you can definitely see why, like broader, you can see more other people. But like the people at the bottom have no more idea what's going on at the top than vice versa.
But then to actually fight from the bottom, you need to work in coalition with others.
Yes, collectivist, materialist politics is leftism.
And that doesn't mean having perfect alignment in your politics, but being able to work across positions of identity.
Right. You don't need to have a perfect alignment of your politics, but like that doesn't mean that men can be women. That's not a political position.
Sometimes also platform to find specific targets you're working on together. And I think AOC's sometime partnership with the Democrats, often partnership with Democratic Socialists, but then also...
Yeah, that's the news to me. Are Democratic Socialists actually like, a party in this country now? Like with representation in Congress? When the fuck did that happen?
Really crafting her own positions is a great example of that coalitional politics at work. Sandberg, of course, is the opposite. Her view is, she says things like, when women lead half our companies and countries and men lead half our homes, then we'll have true equality. That's that white feminist version of equality that imagines if you put women at the top of a hierarchy, somehow she will sanctify that hierarchy, right? And I think it's really fascinating how much Sandberg talks about her own emotion and her own fallibility and her own tears. And I really connect it to that phenomenon of white women's tears. Only in her case, it's like her tears somehow prove her humanity, that sanctify the whole project of corporate capitalism that she's trying to wrestle control over.
Ouch. My God. Heaven forbid that woman expressed any of her feelings about any of that, or the fact that any of it was difficult whatsoever. What the fuck? Oh my God. Just the fact that they want the women to be in the room means that their presence sanctifies capitalism. Wow, I really think you're reading a little deeper into that than Cheryl did, for sure. I can't say that doesn't exist. It never had fucking occurred to me before now. That's a fun one. Yeah, so we don't need to have women in boardrooms because we wouldn't want to be seen as sanctifying capitalism. I don't agree with a lot of what Sheryl Sandberg says, but that's... that's a weird argument. It's really... I mean, obviously, yeah, she's trying to improve capitalism so that it can keep on doing what it's doing. We just need to make it more inclusive, right? Which is liberal feminism, which would be you guys.
But that's just changing the face of it. It's not changing any of the structures.
It's
yeah,
like the meme
agree.
of the pink drones, or
Yeah.
the CNBC segment that went viral of how all of the defense the big defense contractor CEOs are women now. It's like, oh, okay, I mean, wow.
Are they? Or are they trans women? Does it matter to you? Like, yeah, women proving that they can be just as bad as men is not helpful to anything. I agree with that. And I agree with everything they've said for the last minute or two, because all of a sudden we're actually talking about women now. Like, all of us.
But yeah, that's very much the dynamic that you're talking about here. Well, I really appreciate your time today. I know we went a little over, but I really appreciate it. Kyla Schuller, the book is called The Trouble. Oh, here it is. The Trouble with White Women.
Oh, yeah. So that was that. And thank you for sticking with me this long. Like the video if you had a good time listening to me get livid. I'm sorry about all the F-bombs. I'm aggravated today anyway. And I wanted to come and send some of this energy where it belongs. Because, wow, right? There was so much wrong there. And I think I covered most of it. So I really don't have a very long wrap up for y'all today, other than to say thank you so much for being here with me. We got to suffer through this, as infuriating as it may be, because we have to counter it. Okay? These are the sort of arguments, these are the sort of people who would see us forget ourselves as a class, basically. And they just spent all that. She mischaracterized everything that radical feminism stands for, as usual. I really am starting to wonder, like, where do these people get their information? She's supposed to be an academic. She clearly didn't read anything or do the slightest bit of actual research. Which, again, may play to our benefit eventually, because they don't listen to a damn thing that we say, but we're listening to everything that they're saying. We know what they're doing. They have no idea what we're doing. They have no idea. And as aggravating as that is, that these women can just get onto, a major, she says at the beginning of the program that it's a 5-time award-winning program. And say shit like this. Just, oh my God. And of course, this woman is trying to draw a direct line from eugenicist white supremacists of the 19th century to TERFs. I don't think she did a very good job, but that's me. I hope I did a pretty good job of countering her between the F-bombs. And I hope that was illuminating. This is the kind of crap that we're dealing with, that we're up against in the flesh. So thank you so much for sticking with me. I have been Rad Mom, and I will see y'all next time. Have a good one.